Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Jersey Thursday Thinking Podcast. This is a regular feature here at Digital Jersey in the Hub, and in particular in the Turing Room, which has transformed itself quite quickly into a wonderful studio. So my name is Mariota Smutz. I'm head of strategy here at Digital Jersey. This is my first podcast, so I'm going to have a bit of fun today. We're here with some of our DJ bootcampers who've been part of a very unique 12-week program, helping them consider their businesses, their thoughts, their models, but also looking to scale. And so they're in week 10. And so coming towards the end of their journey, I'm sure they're going to be really contemplating that important engagement with investors sort of situation. And just on that, our special guest today is Henry Lawson, managing partner of EcoPragma Capital, a firm that's dedicated to helping us reach our net zero ambition. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much.
So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and perhaps what your connection is to Jersey?
Sure. So that's great, and an honour to be here at Digital Jersey. Connection to Jersey is my son and daughter-in-law live here, but perhaps more important and relevant to Digital Jersey is Tony Mariota, who runs Digital Jersey, and I did business years ago because Tony was actually running the joint venture of the UK mobile operators, and Weave, which was that joint venture, was actually dedicated to generating revenue from advertising and from payments. And Tony was doing that, and I was running Autograph, which is a startup actually dedicated to two ideas. One being able to perform transactions on the web anonymously. Which even means anonymizing your email address and your phone number and even your physical address. Because if you think about it, when you buy something from a vendor on the net, they don't need to know where you live. The only person that needs to know where you actually live is FedEx or DPD or wherever Every or whatever the service is. So being able to personalize that, to make that private, and then also for consumers to be able to declare their own interests on the net. And we launched Autograph because the GDPR regulations were coming out. And we raised a reasonable amount of money over the course of the life of Autograph. We raised $16.5 million from three different venture capitalists, as well as from some Uber angels in Seattle. And we were able to actually build the business and grow that, and then actually sold it in 2019. We sold the underlying operating business at that time back, in fact, to one of the investors. But we retained the IP. And we retain the IP to this day. And the IP, some of that IP is actually being used by some of the major technology companies, and we're actually in the process of pursuing both commercial and legal channels, which there's a limitation to what I can talk about. You'd know more than I would about that, but there's a limitation. But essentially, we're actually pursuing them because they are actually using the IP that we've developed. Now, over that period, we thought that 2014 GDPR was going to come out, so actually starting 3 years before that was going to be the perfect timing. We were going to have everything ready to go for GDPR. Actually, GDPR was delayed, and actually consumers didn't really realize until things like Cambridge Analytica came along, people didn't realize that it was going to be that their data was being used against them and being used in all sorts of ways with which they were very uncomfortable with once they understood it. But that length of time it took meant that we actually exhausted funds more quickly than we would have liked. And actually, if I had my time again, then we would have raised the same amount of money, but we would have spent it at half the rate, because there was going to be a time when the market came to us. And if we'd waited an extra 2 years, we would have been able to put fuel on that fire at the right time. Whereas in 2014, we were putting it on and it wasn't actually the right time. And you can go and hire more salespeople, convinced that you've got a sales problem. You can go and hire more salespeople. But if the market doesn't want to buy what you're looking for, it doesn't make any difference. You're just wasting money. And that's an element of this is timing. And that's certainly what I learned from that experience.
When you were going through that experience and you were sort of understanding before you were looking at the indicators that we would have looked at, what would those indicators have been, do you think?
So it's the analogy I use is like pushing. Being an entrepreneur can be like pushing a huge round boulder, and you can just imagine, a boulder bigger than you, tens or hundreds of tons, and you're pushing against it, and you're pushing with all your might, hoping that starts to move. And actually, you can be going for 6 and 12 months at a time with no idea whether you've actually moved that boulder forward a little bit, or it's stayed in exactly the same place, or it's actually gone backwards a bit towards you. And you've got very little idea on what that is. Until you've actually done it and really worked through a couple of these startups, you don't see that actually when the market's with you, the surface on which that big boulder is, and I'm sorry, I'm an engineer, so everything comes back to physical analogies, but essentially it's tilting downhill very slightly. And you suddenly realize, holy smoke, I just pushed on that and it moved further than I expected. Right, that's the time. And if what you're having to do is to keep pushing uphill the whole time, then it's probably the market timing's not right, or your idea is not right, or you haven't quite honed the Rubik's Cube to make it right. And that's so basically you just got that little unfair advantage that it's actually tilting downhill a bit. And when it goes, it really goes quickly. And that's such an exciting sense for an entrepreneur.
Because you've been involved in a number of businesses over the years, and in your career as you've worn different hats. And I was wondering whether or not you had some particular rules that you might have been able to sort of come to grips with over that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things as an entrepreneur is a very lonely position. It's a very lonely place because you believe in your idea, you're going out and you're pursuing your idea, and you may be able to amass a team around you, and you may have all sorts of friends and family who are supporting you and cheering you and cheering on your way. It's really important because the easiest person to lie to is yourself. And it's really important to set some rules and some parameters right from the outset. I'm going to do this for this length of time. By this date, I'm going to need to see revenues of this much. I'm going to need to see deployment. I'm going to need to see clients like this. And write these things down and just artifact them, put them in a place, and don't refer to them every day. But when the time comes at the anniversary or your birthday or the anniversary of the business or the Christmas or whatever, go back and refer to them and check how you're doing against what you set as your own objectives. Almost every time you will not, I hate to say it, but because we're born as optimists, as entrepreneurs, you will almost certainly not have achieved the goals that you set out for. But have an honest conversation with yourself about whether actually you need to really be rethinking this. And that may be anything from scaling back a little bit on the ambition, accepting that the market may come to you another year or two down the line and not now. It may be, this is a complete turkey, give up. Or it may be, we're really making things here. Let's actually put more fuel on the fire. And you need to have that honest conversation. But the person that needs to have the honest conversation is you with yourself. Because otherwise you will deceive yourself. And if there's one thing I would do is I would follow my brother-in-law. So my brother-in-law trained as an accountant, became finance director of a whole variety of different businesses, including some listed businesses, and then in fact became a CEO of a FTSE 100 company. And Rob has a absolutely fixed mantra that he has a 4-year plan and he has a 4-year window by which he reviews things. And that's not, that seems like, that's very arbitrary. But if you think about it, almost every government system in the world politicians are elected on 4 or 5 year terms. In fact, you told me that New Zealand was 3 year terms. It's the only time we're going to mention New Zealand, because otherwise you start talking about rugby and then we're all in trouble. 4 and 5 year terms. 4 years, get in, spend a year working on it, spend a year understanding what you're going to do, spend 2 years doing it, and then spend a year deciding whether to get out or to carry on and to sign up again. But make sure that you treat it almost like a politician with a term. You're going to do 4 years. Anything less than 4 years is almost certainly too short. And anything more than 4 years is really, a lot of your life. If you actually work out, that's 10% of your working life. So, be serious about it. But that 4 years, and in 2 years doing it and out, is actually a great mantra. And if I spent 13 years at Donovan Data Systems, with the ERP for the advertising business. That was not, I can promise you, 3 conscious terms of 4 years. It was just a continuous iteration of things. And that is, to me, it's really important you have that. You just got the discipline to have a think about it all the time.
We talk about discipline a lot, in lots of different things. Yeah. And I suppose, a previous podcast, there was a discussion around, entrepreneurship. And it's almost like not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur.
No.
Are they?
No, definitely not. I started my career, I'm a mechanical engineer, right? I love taking things to pieces. I bought my first car when I was 13. I've bought and sold motorcycles when I was 11. I'm just, the latter makes me sound like an entrepreneur, but really I was buying motorcycles to be able to take them to pieces and fiddle about with them because I'm an engineer. And I was absolutely convinced all the way through university doing engineering that I was going to be, an automotive engineer of some sort. But as I got through that, I realized that actually I might be an automotive engineer, but actually I was going to end up as the Jaguar cars door handle expert, because I was going to be pushed down into specialization, and it's not what I wanted to do. And that is what actually prompted me to go to business school. And I think it's really important that you're able to consider what you really want to do in life. The very fact that you've actually come on this boot camp is a testament to the fact that you've decided to do something specific in life. But frame it around that and frame that piece. I'm not sure whether that answers your question or not, but...
No, it's right, because it was probably going into before when you were talking about, have that conversation with yourself. Only you can have that conversation with yourself. And it's almost like if you don't have that self-discipline to begin with, there's no point in you becoming an entrepreneur.
Right, I'm sorry, the entrepreneurship point. So the point about entrepreneurship, I think, is actually it's quite addictive. It's really quite addictive. Buying and selling motorcycles for me was really quite addictive. The fact that I could buy, and this ages me, I could buy a really quite decent motorcycle for £100, do it up and sell it for £110 was really exciting. Now that £10 margin doesn't sound like a lot to you because it would barely buy 2 pints, but in those days it would buy 10 pints. So that was worth it. It becomes quite addictive because when you see that and you see that margin, you start to make some money from it. The business starts to make some money. That becomes very addictive. I don't think entrepreneurs are born. I think it is actually about taking a certain level of risk. I've never been an entrepreneur when I've been raising a family. Now, it doesn't mean to say you can't be entrepreneurs, and many of you may have families to speak of, but have families now. But you've got to have a certain appetite for risk as an entrepreneur, and you've got to have a level of risk with which you are comfortable, because there's no point in starting a business and then lying in bed at night going, "Oh my God, this could all go horribly wrong, and if this goes horribly wrong, then, my life is over." That's no good. Don't. If that's the case, then you've actually you've bitten into more risk than is appropriate. You need to be reasonable. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurs tend to sort of push it out there, and then you can get all these basic tropes about, you've got to push it as hard as you can, and you've got to go as fast as you can, and everything else. I'm here to say, I've just given you the example at Autograph. If I was choosing again, I'd have actually backed the throttle off, and I would have actually run at half speed for twice as long.
Do you think, though, just in terms of risk and risk taking, the entrepreneur now is looking at, actually, I've got my day job, but I'll do this side hustle, and there's a growing phenomenon of people who are taking on side hustles. I mean, I think that could be the way forward for a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the boot camp, not the bootstrappers, right? But actually, bootstrapping is a fantastic thing to do. We're dealing with a business at the moment where they've the entrepreneur has built a business which is in the voluntary carbon markets. Basically, it's a data and information business about voluntary carbon markets. Voluntary carbon markets being carbon credits that companies buy in order to offset emissions somewhere else. So this can be anything from cook stoves in Africa, because a cook stove in Africa emits a lot less CO2 than traditional cooking methods. It can be all sorts of different forestry projects. These are voluntary carbon market projects. But what Guy's done is actually build a business selling information about those voluntary carbon markets, being able to actually look at what the pricing is, look at the forecast on what those carbon markets are, and he's built a lovely business around it. But he's done it by completely bootstrapping. He has been, figuratively, but he's been eating pot noodles for 3 years, and now has a business that he still retains 100% of the voting equity and 85% of the total equity. 15% is actually in options for senior members of staff, and is now raising his first institutional round, which is about £4 million. But frankly, raising £4 million, having bootstrapped it, he's in a much, much stronger position. He's going to have to give up much less of the business than he would have done if he'd actually, at the very beginning, had actually taken on an investor of any sort, be that angels or an institution. So, the more that you can bootstrap it, the more that you can pull from your own resources. And if that means holding down a day job and doing it in the evening, the further down there you go, you de-risk it for the investor, you actually increase the valuation, and most importantly, you de-risk it for yourself. And that is really important.
You mentioned before you had some more of those lessons learned, or those rules. I was wondering if we might start getting more into those.
Sure. I mean, there's a number of things. As an investor now, and having spent time at Warburg Pincus for 2 years as well on the investor side in PE, there's a number of different things that investors will do that you need to be really well aware of. So one of them is the fact that do not confuse a lovely, positive conversation with a venture capitalist for a commitment for a venture capitalist. They're two different things. And the reason I say that is because in venture capital, and I confess we do the same thing ourselves, in venture capital, you will meet with a young company and you'll look at it and go, I like that. It's in the right area. It's in the right thesis area. It's at the right stage. Clearly a great entrepreneur is actually starting it. Perhaps some previous experience, perhaps not. But you look at it and then you say, fantastic, would love to keep in touch, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 3 months or 6 months' time. Now, you think, that's fantastic, this person wants to stay in touch. And sure enough, in 3 or 6 months' time, you can ping them and they will want to hear what you've got to say. But the reason that they're doing that is because 3 or 6 months later, they're taking the notes from the meeting that they had the previous time, and they're comparing the notes compared to where you've got to. And there's lots of things there. So one of them is entrepreneurs' forecasts are always optimistic. And they are always optimistic. No matter how much you think they're real, they're optimistic. They are looking at how close to what you actually said you were going to do you've got to. And frankly, if it's more than about half what you said you were going to do, you've actually done really, really well. So don't beat yourself up about it. But then the crucial thing is they're going to say, okay, 6 months ago, you were talking to this client or that potential prospect. How did that go? Where's that? And see whether you've actually followed through and whether the business that you were forecasting was going to come in has actually come in. The clients that you forecast were going to come in. So make sure that when you go for the first meeting with the venture capitalist, it's important to be positive, but it's important to be realistic about what your prospects are, and not to put too high a probability, or we're just round the corner from having this fantastic contract with such and such a company. Because what you're doing is you're putting the coat on the hook, and they're going to come back and check that coat's on the hook in 6 months' time. So just, there's one here, which is your relationship with an investor, your relationship with a venture capitalist is not a one-shot deal. It's a multi-shot deal. That's one piece that investors do. The other one is you do not need to build a model. You were just talking about numbers a bit earlier. You do not need to build a model that is all singing, all dancing. If the P&L in your model, the profit and loss statement in your model, has more than about 7, 8, 9, 10 lines, it's probably too detailed for the purposes of presenting to investors. The reason for that is that they know full well that you're going to be optimistic with your projections. They know full well that what you actually do is not going to be exactly the way that this is. You are not forecasting the quarterly profits of Shell in the third quarter of next year. You are building a business which is highly uncertain, and it's just not worth spending time on that model at a level of detail which is overly detailed. However, make 100% certain that you understand all the numbers in that model. Keep it simpler, but make sure you understand every number, and make sure you know what assumptions those numbers are based on, because you will get grilled on those, and it's your understanding of it is what they care about much more than the fact that the number is 10% larger or smaller than you think it might need to be. And it's absolutely vital. The number of times that I have people come over and then they say, "Oh, I'll have to get back to you. My accountant looks after that." "Oh, I'll have to get back to you. I'm not quite sure what we put in the model." If that's the answer, then what it demonstrates is that you don't have a fundamental understanding of the drivers that drive your business, and that's exactly what the venture capitalist is looking for.
Just on assumptions, is it better to be more conservative with those assumptions, or or should you be going in saying, "I'm quite optimistic. These are the assumptions that I've based upon because I've been quite optimistic, and this is the research or feedback that I'm getting"? Which one would you go, or is it?
Well, there are two ways of developing the numbers, right? So one way of fundamentally, there's only two ways of developing the numbers. One is to build from the bottom up, to say, okay, right, we can make this many calls, we can call on this many customers, we'll get this rate of take up by the customers, therefore we can actually build up the model from below. And the other one is to do what we call boil the ocean. Lots of people call boil the ocean, which is, the global total addressable market for hoodies is this number. I'm not picking on you, don't worry. For hoodies is this number. And, Tommy jeans can get this market share of that, and then the ones in a beige color can be this share of that market, and we're going to sell £3 billion worth of hoodies. That's what the total addressable market is. The right answer is somewhere in between. You've got to think through the assumptions at the bottom, but you've got to come at it from the top. I would not be too exercised on this stuff, and I certainly, depending on who you ask on this, you'll get different answers. So if you ask the average entrepreneur, they will actually put in very positive, ambitious numbers. And as I said, you've got to be a little bit careful with that. But the venture capitalist is kind of expecting that. What I would not do is get your accountant to put the numbers together. And I don't know have we got any accountants in the room? We've got an accountant in the room. Okay, so there are other kinds of accountants available. So I'm not going to position you in a particular box. But accountants are really, really good at being able to actually capture history. They're not as good at looking forwards about the assumptions. And not all accountants fit into that box, right? Let's accept that. But fundamentally, accountants are numerate historians that do a fantastic job of actually capturing that. And thank God they do, because it means that corporate accounts and everything else are actually in the right places and follow GAAP and all the other rules that they have to abide by. But accountants also are not very good at thinking about actually what the projections look like. And because that's just not part of what the training is. The training is to make sure that history is reflected accurately rather than thinking about what the future is. And so I urge people never to use their accountant, the ordinary accountant, to do that. Now, that's not to say that all accountants are born equal, and there are lots of accountants that are able to actually do that incredibly effectively. But in general, my own experience of accountants has been something in your accountancy training trains you when things are going well to take some of that money off the table and stick it in the pockets for a rainy day in the future. And that is that's great, but is unfortunately not what an early stage startup business needs. Is that would be my assertion. I'm sorry, I'm looking at you because you put your hand up to be an accountant, but it's just one of those things where I'm very skeptical of the interface between that profession and entrepreneurship. Not always the case, but I've now written off, because probably half of Jersey are accountants. I don't know.
You've, as a pilot, you were using a really great analogy before, which I quite liked. The one around.
So the essence of this is, you've spent 10 weeks in boot camp. You've run through. You've developed your marketing plan. You've developed your investment memorandum. You've got a lovely deck that you can go out to investors with. You've developed your numbers and your model. You're developing all these various pieces. And you've done some market testing, and you've probably already started the business, so you may well actually have some sales. Once you get to that point I described a bit earlier, with the huge rock that you're pushing on, blooming hard, and it's, you're sweating your guts out pushing on it, and you discover that actually it's starting to move downhill, and you've got what is described as sort of product market fit. Bloody hell, we're actually making something or selling something that people actually want to buy. And they're prepared to pay enough money that we can actually make a nice gross margin on it. Holy smoke, we're off to the races. For me, that's the point where you end up taxing your aeroplane, which is your startup, to the end of the runway at Jersey Airport and pointing the aeroplane down the runway. And you're on the westerly runway at Jersey Airport, and you're ready to take off. This is it. This startup is now going to start off. You've now put all the pieces into place, right? You've including having got the early traction to show that you can actually make it. Now's the time to put the throttle on the aeroplane up to full gas and start piling down the runway in order to be able to take off into the air. And now your sales are going to take off and everything else. I'm going to pick on accountants again. I'm really sorry. The accountant's going to turn around and go, well, you know what? If you do that, we've only got 6 months runway. And they use the phrase runway, right? There's only 6 months runway available. If we didn't spend quite so hard, then, and pull the throttles back a bit and only go down the runway at half speed, then we would be able to have 12 months runway. That's got to be a better thing. The only trouble is, you're entrepreneurs. You're trying to build a business that takes off. And the one thing I can tell you for sure is, if you start in your aeroplane at the start of the runway of Jersey Airport at half throttle, you are going to go off the end of the runway at Jersey and end up in St. Juan's Bay at half throttle, not having taken off. So when the time is right, put all the fuel onto the fire. But make absolutely certain, as I said earlier, make sure that ball is actually downhill, and every time you get a sail, you're getting further along and it's going further than you expect and it's moving. That's the time to put the fuel on the fire and then go for it. Because otherwise, all that will happen if you don't put the fuel on the fire, the aeroplane ends up off the end of the runway. Does the airplane end up off the runway? Of course not. It's an analogy. But actually, what ends up happening is competitors catch up. You run out of steam. All sorts of other things happen. There's a time when it's right, and when it's right, go for it.
We spoke before about the role that accountants can play. But
I'm sorry, I keep going on about accountants.
One of the things in our previous chat before, and we were talking about that engagement with investors, how important is it to really get that problem right? And what's that sort of balance that you're seeing where people are spending a bit too much time describing their problem?
Okay, so I don't know, been doing this for more years than I care to remember. And I have never come across a presentation from a startup that under-describes the core business problem. I've only ever seen them over-described. So I don't know what problems you're trying to solve. I don't know what businesses that you're actually in. But the presentation will go somewhere along the lines of, there's a terrible problem out there, and wow, we've got the solution for it, and here's the business that we want to operate, and this is the description of it, and this is the team, and this is what P&L looks like, and this is why we need the money. Something along those lines. That first bit, frankly, if you've ended up in the VC's office or in the angel's office or in some ultra-high net worth individual here in Jersey, and they haven't understood that problem within about 2 sentences and 1 slide, you shouldn't be there, either because there isn't a problem or because that person is never going to understand it. The problem has got to be straightforward, very, very straightforwardly described, and just get in and get out. And it's then get on to what you're going to do, because everybody understands the problem. Obviously, EcoPragma, we are every business that we're actually engaged in is doing something towards the net zero transition and reducing carbon emissions. The result of that is that all of them are actually solving that same problem in some way. Now, do I have to be as trite as that's the single slide and then you move on? No, you've got to define it properly, but it should be work on a single slide that captures the problem, and don't spend more than 1 slide on it, because the number of times that you will actually see a VC kind of go, yeah, get on with it, and the VC has, they're trained like this. They're not being the queen, It's actually right. Okay, yeah, I get what the issue is. Now come on, now tell me about you and what you're going to do about it.
Would you be able to sort of talk a little bit more about EcoPragma's sectors that you guys are looking at? Because I find, they're all sort of at different degrees of, I don't want to use the word of disruption, but they're all at different degrees of challenges that need to be sort of addressed.
Yeah, and actually they're very relevant to Jersey as well. So EcoPragma, Michael and I founded 3 years ago. EcoPragma, the clue's in the name. Eco, obvious. It's that contribution to the net zero transition. And then Pragma is a very, very specific 7-level waterfall of how we actually look at businesses. And in our case, we are dealing with, I've already told you, bioethanol production. We're dealing in heat pumps. We're dealing in virtual carbon markets. We're dealing in NPK fertilizer. It all starts with the science. And we're both engineers. We start from basically, the physics, the chemistry, and our third partner, Henrietta, also has a degree in biochemistry. So we basically start with science. We then move on to the engineering. Does it work from an engineering standpoint? Can you actually make this happen repeatedly? We then go on to the economics. Can you actually do that and actually make money on a unit economics basis? We then look at regulations. How do the regulations stack up against this? Because those are very often very important in this area. We then look at marketing. We then look at the substitution and what are we substituting for. And then finally, we look at the team and the quality of the team. Now, the vast majority of VCs that you talk to, and depending on what stage they're at, certainly in PE this is the case, then they will actually come in and they will want to know all about the money. They will want to, everything's measured in pounds and pence. We start from a completely different approach. We start from, we want to understand what the underlying technology looks like, and then we go through that. And frankly, we geek out about the technology. I'm sorry, that's what we are. We're engineers to our fingertips. That's how it works. But EcoPragma then applies that to really 4 sectors. The first is actually the decarbonisation of transport, and we worry about the reason why we're in the bioethanol business is because that's a precursor to sustainable aviation fuel. So actually, the decarbonisation of aviation per se, because electric's able to do very limited things but not much, and hydrogen is a complete and utter farce. And you don't want to go down the hydrogen route with me because we'll be here for the rest of the conversation. So, but essentially that doesn't work. But then marine is really difficult to decarbonise, and actually road transport is relatively straightforward to decarbonise, and we're already seeing that happening with 15% of UK car registrations already in battery electric vehicles. That's the first one. The second one is actually the built environment. Is actually decarbonising the built environment, which means, how do we actually decarbonise heating? This is one, interestingly, in the decarbonisation of transport, Jersey's behind on, because you use a lot of jet fuel for people coming in and out, you use a lot of bunker fuel for ships coming in and out, and you are woefully behind on electric vehicles. It must be something to do with range anxiety because Jersey's so big. I mean, I don't know. But there we go. On this one, on the heating, the built environment, you're actually incredibly good. Something over 50% of homes in Jersey are actually heated electrically, and that means that actually that Jersey does incredibly well on scores of the degree to which it's decarbonised already. There is obviously the tragedy of the gas explosion that took place in December means that there is a big move in Jersey to actually removing gas from the system, and I think that's actually something that's overdue here. It's already very expensive, but decarbonisation of the built environment. Third one is actually the digitization of power delivery, because in the same way as we saw that transition I described earlier of going from newspaper ads and TV ads and radio ads to digital ads on social media or on websites and emails. In exactly the same way as we saw that transition, we're just about to see the same transition in power, because an awful lot of the big consumers of electricity that you have in your home should interact with the power network, and when the power network is struggling to cope, should be able to switch them off. And when the power network is struggling because it's got too much capacity, too much electricity, it should be actually delivering to those. So your immersion heater or your heat pump or your EV charging should be being controlled that way. So the digitization of that. And then the fourth one is the industrial processes, where we see an awful lot where industrial processes are assumed to always be filthy and always be things that require gas for heat. And actually what we've demonstrated is that 95% of those applications you can actually use electric heat in. So what you can see passing through there is the electrification of practically everything, but there being some exceptions.
Absolutely. And I think you highlighted before, how does the electric grid manage all of that? Yeah. How does it? How resilient will that be? I think that's part and parcel of a whole range of challenges, which we probably won't go down to today. But just sort of coming back to some of those core rules for the entrepreneurs, I think some of the take-home bits that I certainly came across was, it's almost like back yourself. You need to sort of keep yourself accountable, but actually it really comes down to making sure you can really back yourself, and not so much the accountant who may be giving you some sort of conservative advice?
Yes, I back yourself. If you're 10, well, first of all, congratulations on having got on the program in the first place. Secondly, congratulations for having got to week 10 in a 12-week process. You know, that's a reason to celebrate in and of itself. Back yourself. But I think the other piece is, make sure before you finish this program, what are the 3 or 4 levers that you know, 3 or 4 KPIs that you are managing within that business. There are only 3 or 4. And if there are more than 3 or 4, then I'm sorry, you know, reject half of those and come back to there's no more than 3 or 4. What are the 3 or 4 levers? What are the 3 or 4 things? Is it daily sales coming through the till? Is it the number of dentists you've signed up? Is it the Is it the amount of? Is it the total number of real estate, or the total number of mortgages, or the total number of equity participation? I mean, I've done a little reading. So you know, what is the number? What are the key metrics that you need to understand in order to be able to run your business, and then back yourself at your ability to actually change those and move those.
And these are levers that you must have control over, yeah? You've got to be able to do, it's too much to say these are indirect aspects.
Well, just, you know, yes, levers that you can control over and levers that you can actually do something with, you know, get something done. And if you can't do it, no one else is going to do it, because it's your business. And that's the joy of it, you're fully responsible for it, but you can actually, if anybody can do it, you can.